Welcome everyone to our media availability. This is day 3. We passed a few bills at the first of session yesterday and the day before. Straight across, we didn't vote on them twice, which is tradition for the Senate. But those were bills that had a lot of eyes on, a lot of discussion and debate during the interim. And we felt like instead of voting on them twice, we could move those across. But we're now back to traditional Senate rules and procedures. We'll be utilizing the third reading calendar and making sure we have 2 looks and 2 votes on all bills. Let's see, what else is going on? What's going on with the minority party? Senator Escamilla, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. We're obviously some of our bills have been already, we're presenting our bills, so it's nice to have them ready, and some committee hearings have approved them, so we're just in the process, and we had some constituents asking questions about the process the last 2 days, so I'm glad you clarified that, but we're just doing our business and making sure we represent that part of our population then.
Yeah, I noticed Senator Davis had 3 bills in a row
Today,
today.
yes.
Yeah. And Harper, that's not quite the Harper show, but we had a question yesterday about raising the cap on income tax, the $250,000 income tax cap. So we did some research and discovered there really isn't anything on a federal basis that deals with $250,000, but there may be a proposal which our viewer or listener may have heard about that, and I think it's Senator DeBackus's bill, that is proposing that taxable income above $250,000 in the state of Utah.
$500,000 actually.
Oh, $500,000.
Yes.
Be raised to 7% instead of the single rate 5%. So if that's what you were referring to, that is a bill before the legislature that will go through the process and see what happens with that.
I think it's in committee Friday.
Oh.
In revenue tax.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions from our media?
President Trump has done a number of things very quickly since taking office on some of the issues that Utah voters had raised concerns about. I think today he signed something about building a wall along the border with Mexico. He's dealt with refugees, Muslims, others, through executive order, through different things. I'm just wondering, overall, are these things that are good for Utah? Are these things that you think you would support as lawmakers here? The country moving in that direction to, increase the border, literally size of the border wall, prevent some refugees and others from entering the country easily?
Well, we don't want people entering the country illegally. We're a country of laws, and so people, I think at certain times come across the border without going through proper immigration channels. I question whether maybe some of our rules and procedures ought to be looked at and revised, maybe streamlined a little bit. We're all here as most of us are here as immigrants. There are some Native Americans that were here long before the immigrants from Europe and other parts of the world. But and I think most people in Utah feel like that people ought to come through the proper channels, and we support that. So now, it'd be very difficult, and I think Utah made a statement with regards, or at least the legislature did, with regards to immigration a couple of years ago, where we didn't want to break up families. We didn't want to, if you've been here 20 years, we're going to kick you out type of situation, but we're giving a pathway for people to be acknowledged and so forth. And that bill that we passed on immigration was federal government trumped that bill, and no pun intended. So it really didn't become law, and in fact, we debated over the last couple of years whether we keep that on the books, those statutes. So I think that's more of the flavor of Utah, what we passed back in, was it 2011? And, but I think for most Utahns, we would agree that there ought to be, people should come and follow the laws.
So I'll just add to national security, and I guess the wall that continues to be a part of the conversation. So part of what I've been reading is that he will be removing federal money or federal funding from sanctuary cities. We don't have those in Utah, so it will impact the state of Utah in terms of how he's planning on paying for that wall. But I really applaud, for example, the CEO for the World Trade Center here in Utah that spoke, Derek Miller. He spoke yesterday about the impact to our economy with all that he's doing with trade. And that trade component, I think, is a bigger concern in terms of our economy. And, he was very good in explaining that, and I think he wrote an op-ed saying, hey, this may not be the best approach. Utah has a big relationship with Mexico, for example, and some of the countries on the TPP. So I think that's something we should be concerned about as a state. The wall, and I'm still not sure how that's going to work. They still have to go through some congressional process. But my understanding right now is that there are a lot of transportation being paralyzed in some of the borders with Mexico because of that executive order, and that may eventually hurt the state of Utah's economy. We do have a big trade partnership with Mexico, so I think that's something that we may eventually have to deal with.
What about kind of the overall theme of the administration so far against
nothing that we were
immigration?
not expecting. I mean, it's expected, I guess, from his rhetoric, but in terms of the refugees, I think Utah has been very outspoken, the governor and our leadership, that we are a state that welcomes refugees, and that I think that the process has been vetted in terms of how lengthy it is for a refugee to enter our country. So I'm not sure what the concern is that they were raising with regards to that executive order from yesterday from specific countries. But, I don't know that we're shocked or surprised. We were kind of like expecting that with the new administration.
I've thought, and I have believed for a long time, that there ought to be an expedited way for people to come to the country to work legally. And I've been dealing with some immigration issues with people who have been here for 40 or 50 years who were married during World War II and came to the United States. And now their cards have expired, and I have to go back and redo their whatever green card or whatever it is that they do. There ought to be a more expedited way for us to bring people into the country to work, and for them to then leave and go back where they came from, and if that's their intent is to come here to work. We certainly ought to, though, in the meantime, abide by our citizenship laws. Whatever the laws are of the country, as the President said, we should be abiding by those laws. There should be better ways for us to be able to bring people in, though, that need to come to Utah to work. We have companies who are right now needing workers, and it's hard for them to find workers at this time. So we definitely have those needs. To your question of the overall theme of the Trump administration, he's doing what he told the voters that he would do, and the voters supported him, and the voters of Utah supported him. So I guess my thoughts on that are, I haven't seen anything that he is doing that wasn't already talked about during the campaign, and that a large majority, at least of the states who have votes in the Electoral College didn't support private. The popular vote, a little bit different story, but certainly peaceful transition has taken place. The new administration is now in power, and they're starting to do some things that they campaigned on, so nothing really unexpected.
Excuse me, as a supporter of President Trump, one of his earliest supporters here in Utah, Are you comfortable with that tone? Is that going to allow you as a lawmaker and legislative leadership to accomplish the things you want to on these issues?
Well, I hope so. I hope a lot of the things that President Trump campaigned on, we're actually able to get done. I believe that his some of the things that he campaigned on law and order, on being able to have better trade agreements where we take care of our needs here in the United States before we do with other countries. Some of those may not be totally beneficial to the state of Utah, is kind of what we're seeing out there. But overall, if the country is able to do better and create more jobs, keep jobs here in this country, and have our people be able to go to work that are here, I believe that's something that he campaigned on, and I think that was one of the things that made people vote for him. So, yeah.
But I think it goes to my opening speech too, that now that the shoe's kind of on the other foot.
With the other, yeah, of course.
We were very upset, a lot of Republicans and a lot of people here in the state of Utah by some of the executive orders of the Obama administration. And now people who were in favor of a lot of those are now
On the other side.
upset that now our new president has a lot of power. And I raised the question, and I'm willing to join with my Democratic colleagues to say, enough of the executive orders, unless they're minutia that are truly administrative. But if they're making policy with executive orders, they should go through Congress, the voice of the people. That was the check and balance. That's the way it should be done, so that the voice of the people is heard in all of these decisions, and it isn't a unilateral and I feel like it's almost like tyranny when one person unilaterally makes those kind of decisions. So I'm hoping that
Yeah.
we all kind of, now that shoe's on the other foot, we've all experienced this, let's, no matter who's in the present position, let's restrict that so that major policy decisions are made with Congress and the president working together.
And it's a call to our congressional delegation to, comprehensive immigration reform, to your point. I mean, we've talked for 40 years on this issue.
Yeah.
Utah took the first step and put something before the nation, and, they haven't done anything. So I think it's, we expected this from the opposition in terms of President Trump, what he was gonna do. There are obviously the Constitution and other checks and balances in place, so we'll see how the courts also enter into this process. But a Congress that is not taking action is also hurting our nation, and we should bring that balance to the table. But to your point, I think our biggest concern is communities feeling not, unsafe or not welcome, and I think Utah has been very outspoken as a community that we welcome refugees and that we welcome, we want to keep families together, and that's, that still brings hope, but we will be very obviously proactive now in a totally different situation to push back, absolutely.
Yeah, and I just say, I respect this debate, and I think it's a good debate to have, that I don't think that the inaction of Congress is any justification for the executive branch to have unilateral authority over anything. You have to bring the Congress along with you. The voice of the people has to be with you to make these major policy changes. That's the way it was set up. That's the way I think it should function. And if they're at loggerheads with one another, and if there is gridlock back there, I think it's an indication that they're dealing with issues that are reserved to the states.
Yeah.
And send it back to the states for us to deal with. You deal with borders, international issues, across state borders issues. States are in a much better situation to deal with all the things, everything else, and to deal with them according to how we feel we should be governed. and according to the values of the people in our state. And that was the other beauty of the organization of the United States, is the states were autonomous on all those issues except for national issues and across state border issues. Any other questions?
I wasn't
That
here.
was the long
Long answer.
answer to the short question, sorry.
I wasn't here yesterday, but I'm just curious, with the, I don't know if you've spoken to the Hinkley Institute's Salt Lake Tribune poll recently about school funding, about tax increases. Over 50% of people polled were in favor of a small tax increase to better fund public schools. And just with the slight discussion today, I'm just curious, is that sentiment trickled up to the Senate yet, or can we see a similar sentiment from some senators as they're listening to their constituents?
We talked a little bit about this yesterday,
Mhm.
but I'm happy to just briefly talk about it today. We're working with Education First and the other stakeholders who want to increase the income tax rate by initiative. There's Senator DeBacco's bill, and Senator Jones had a bill a couple years ago to get rid of or cap the exemptions on the income tax, and would raise $200 or $300 million. I think there's a question out there that we need to get our heads wrapped around, whether we have the revenue streams and in the right places to meet the needs of our growing population for the next 30 years, a doubling of the population, as Senator Okerlund has articulated. Do we have the tax revenue in those systems for the future, and are we investing enough now in infrastructure so that we don't face congestion, school problems, all kinds of issues, as we have a growing population along in the state, especially along the Wasatch Front and in other areas. I mean, growth issues are not quite the problem in our rural communities, but jobs are a big issue for them, and we've heard Senator Okerlund talk about that. And so it's very difficult. I'm going to be straight up. It's going to be very difficult for a legislature, our legislature, to raise taxes to that magnitude. We did it 2 years ago. We increased the gas tax and increased the property tax $75 million, but $750 to $850 million. That's a big political ask, and I don't think that, even though a lot of our constituents may feel that way, when it absolutely comes down to voting in the booth or re-electing somebody that's raised taxes that much, I think there's going to be some pushback from the communities. At least that's my assessment of it. But we're going to be working with the stakeholders and see if there's some common ground, or if there's something that the legislature can do during the session. But one thing that at least the legislature, I think, is adamant about is that we're not going to fund anything until we know what we're going to fund and what the potential outcomes are. And I think if there's some compelling reasons, it's a possibility that the legislature might act, maybe not to the tune of $800 million, but maybe something more incremental.
Mr. President, one quick question. I wonder if you have any thoughts about what the President's decision yesterday related to Keystone and Dakota pipelines might mean for Utah, and whether the state ought to be doing more to further oil and gas exploration.
Well, I mean, I don't think it affects us too much. I think I'd defer here to Senator Okerlund. I think he's has more information on that, except that one of the good things about the pipeline is then they're not going to have the oil on rail cars, and some of the safety issues, the public safety issues that come with transporting oil that way. And the free flow of this energy is important to our economy, and so I support the building of the Keystone pipeline. I think it's a good thing. I think it'll be a public safety issue, and it will allow those resources to more efficiently be transferred to the places where they need to go. I know that that was at least stopped on the basis of clean air or global warming or climate change, I'm not sure how much difference that would really make. But there are some compelling reasons for safety and just the free flow of those in an interstate commerce type of, or an international commerce situation.
Yeah, Senator?
Yeah, pipelines are a much more efficient way to move petroleum products, not only from a standpoint, as the President said, of efficiency, but safety. When you take all of the trucks and trains out of play, once the pipeline is built, obviously it has a tremendous effect on air quality if you can pipeline those petroleum products. But to your question of how that might affect us, I believe it sends a message that this administration will be much more likely to be supportive of energy production, how that affects us on our public lands, where there may have been difficulties for companies to come here and be able to produce the tremendous natural resources that we have in the state of Utah, which are very abundant and very high quality. Is yet to be seen, but I believe that it may send a message to some of the companies who have shied away from an area like Utah in public lands, where they have to go out and get federal permits, have to work with federal agencies to be able to do the work that needs to be done to be able to produce these tremendous natural resources. Maybe the message now is you can come to Utah and get a permit from the federal agencies and be able to do business. And that would be a tremendous boon to especially some of those counties where energy production is so important to their economies, like Uinta and Duchesne counties right now, who have been in a tremendous depression out there. Unemployment has been 10% in Uinta County over the past couple of years, where in the state of Utah, it's in the 3% range, 3 point something. So those counties, those economies are not doing nearly as well when you get off the Wasatch Front. And a lot of that is because of these federal policies that have restricted us from being able to do the things that we need to do out there to have a strong economy and produce these tremendous resources that we have that are needed all over the world.
What would be, what could the state be doing differently or better to further exploration?
Well, the state does a tremendous job. Our Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining gets permits out in a hurry. We're able to get permits out in about 4 months in a typical application for drilling, for example. That might take 2 years on a federal lands, in a BLM case. So the state, I think, could certainly work with these federal agencies if we have an opportunity to be able to cooperate more. If the federal agencies are more willing to work more closely with us. We have even offered in the past to have the state of Utah do the permitting for federal agencies. They say they don't have enough people to be able to do it. We've even said we'll do it. We'll go through the process. We'll make sure that it's safe environmentally, that we go through and make sure it's sustainable. And so there are a lot of things that the state can do, but mostly what needs to be done is at the federal level to be able to allow these things to happen.
Is it time to revisit state permitting for the feds, given the new administration and the seemingly more friendly attitude toward oil and gas exploration?
I think that will happen naturally with the new Interior Secretary and some of the people that are going to be working under them. I think they're going to be looking at how things happen on the BLM, which is overseen by the Interior and the Interior Department Secretary. I think those all of those policies that have been so restrictive in the past may be a little bit less restrictive now.
So you would support that? You would support state permitting for federal permits?
Absolutely.
You think the feds loosening or expediting permitting changes the economics of the oil and gas, which is really, I mean, with the oil and gas at $45 to $50 a barrel, it's not economical to drill anywhere.
No, not the price that's based mainly on supply and demand, but When we get to the point where oil and gas is a hot commodity again, the price starts going up, which it will, and it is already starting to go back up, then it makes a huge difference to these companies that are coming in and looking at Utah. If they can go to Texas or North Dakota, where there aren't public land issues that they have to deal with, and they can get permits in 4 or 5 months, rather than go through a lengthy, expensive 2-year process on our federal lands, obviously they're gonna go where it's faster and cheaper. So that's where the real effect is.
We need to get you guys to the salt palace.
Our basin also has the wax, so I think that's a very good comment, and, you know, there's a threshold of a price that makes it economically feasible, but I don't think that's any reason to stop us from, you know, putting in the infrastructure and the policies and processes when the price does go back up.
You have an expectation that it's gonna improve, things are gonna get better.
Yeah, and those energy jobs are some of the highest paying jobs that we have in the state.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.